Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Straw Hat Luffy, The Black Fist by J.R.R. Toast. What if Luffy had never eaten the devil fruit Shanks had brought into the bar that day? What if he started sailing a little earlier than canon? How would his story be different? Would he be the same Luffy we know and love? One thing is for sure, Luffy and his friends are in for a wild adventure. Adios.
Chapter 13. Fish and Ships. Nami sighed. It was a beautiful day out on the waters of the East Blue. The sun shone brightly in a sky filled with big beautiful white clouds, the blue water reflecting its rays. The Orange's eyes roamed the deck of their new ship as the wind blew through her short hair, looking for her companions. Luffy slept on the figurehead of their vessel, sprawled out and uncaring of the fact that he could fall into the water below at any moment. He dubbed the perch as his spot as soon as they'd set off. The girl scanned for the other occupant of the boat and her eyes found a green head of hair doing some exercising just outside the storage room. It was where he'd decided to keep all of his equipment. She scoffed, remembering when he and Luffy had brought his weights on board. She still couldn't really believe it was possible for humans to be as strong as they were. She shook her head. No use dwelling on it. Her eyes stopped scanning for passengers and began to roam the deck once more, her smile growing. She couldn't help it. The ship was perfect. The going merry. The three companions had taken to calling her Mary for short. She walked up the steps toward the galley and turned when she reached the top. The girl leaned against the railing and looked out once again, the memory of the first time she stood there flashing through her mind. She didn't stop it as it took her back to seeing the ship for the first time. Ship? Nami exclaimed. She'd totally forgotten, but she'd been planning to ask Kaya if she had one she was willing to part with. Obviously, if the blonde had asked for compensation, Zoro would have paid for it, but that was beside the point. The point was, she wanted to get to Mad Treasure's hideout as quickly as possible. She'd already been away for a while and Arlong didn't like it when she was gone for too long. The girl resisted the urge to scowl. She wanted a bigger ship so they could sail straight to the hideout rather than having to stop on the way. It would definitely cut off some time. Not too much, but enough to make it worth asking. The problem was, it had totally slipped her mind. And with everything that had happened, it was coming as a shock to her that Luffy had actually managed to get one. Yeah, Luffy exclaimed excitedly. Kaya said that no one really uses it anymore. The straw-hatted boy stood to his feet and nodded toward the door. You think you can make it down to the docks? Nami groaned but slid her legs back out of the bed and placed them on the wood floor, slowly standing to her feet. Her muscles groaned slightly but it wasn't too bad. She tried to take her first step and, instead, yelped when she was lifted into the air. Too slow, yelled a laughing Luffy as he carried the girl toward the door. Zoro, come on, let's go show Nami the ship, he said to his green-haired friend. He was really excited. He just knew she was going to love it. Yeah, I'm coming, Zoro replied. He stood up and grabbed his swords from where they were sitting by the windowsill, tucking them into his belly warmer. She's got legs, you know. Shut it, you idiot, I didn't ask him to pick me up, Nami screamed from Luffy's arms. Zoro only smirked as he listened to Luffy's laughter echoing through the hallway. As they came upon the docks, Nami could only think one thing: it was beautiful. Mary and Kaya stood next to the boat chatting with one another as the three approached. Mary, noticing the teens, pointed over Kaya's shoulder and she turned in their direction, a small smile coming to her face. Luffy carefully stepped onto the dock and set Nami down. Hey, Kaya, said the straw-hatted boy, waving in the blonde-haired girl's direction. Hello, Luffy, Kaya said, returning his wave and smile. She turned her eyes to Nami and they visibly softened. I'm glad you're feeling better, Nami. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you woke up. The orange-haired girl smiled back at the blonde. It's okay. I'm alive and that's all that matters. She meant it too. We can talk more later, Kaya said. Right now, I know you want to know about the ship. Her smile turned into a small smirk as looked at Nami, knowingly. I believe I could be of some use in that department, came Mary's voice from over Kaya's shoulder. He walked forward and looked Nami in the eyes before bowing his head. Before that, however, I must express my most sincere apologies to you, my lady." Nami's eyes widened. She hadn't been expecting an apology. In her mind, it wasn't anyone's fault but Kuro's for being the damned pirate he was. So, the fact that the butler was apologizing surprised her. "Mary, there's no need for that," she said, waving her hands in front of her. "Kuro was the one at fault." Mary looked up in curiosity. "Kuro?" The orangeite let her hands rest back at her sides. "It was his real name. At least that's what he told me," she replied. "That's it," yelled Zoro all of a sudden. He stepped up next to Luffy and addressed the group with his revelation. "I knew I'd seen his face somewhere before. It was on an old bounty poster." Luffy looked at the swordsman weirdly. "What the hell are you talking about, Zoro?" he asked. "A while back when I first really started bounty hunting, he was one of the biggest bounties in the East Blue. I can't remember the exact number but I remember it being high," said Zoro, "but his name was Kuro of 100 Plans. And his bounty expired almost 2 years ago. Some marine got him, I think." "That lines up with what he told me," Nami chimed in. She went to continue but her eyes glanced over at Kaya and she paused. She was putting up a good front but Nami could tell that the current topic was bothering her. Maybe it was best to leave it be for now. "Enough about that," said the orangeite, quickly changing the subject. Her eyes roamed over the lamb-headed ship that sat at the edge of the dock. "Mary," she ordered, "stand up and tell me all about this beauty." The butler's back immediately straightened out like a soldier in the presence of his commander and he began to rattle off all of the specifications of their new vessel. The ship's name is the Going Merry. It is a caravel with one main mast and a mizzenmast. No foremast. It's equipped with a jib and central steer rudder. Instead of the traditional steering wheel, a whipstaff attached to the rudder is used to steer. The whipstaff is located in the same room as the galley. The man paused to take a quick breath and began again. The ship's armaments consist of 4 cannons. 1 in the bow pointing forward, 1 in the stern, and 2 pointing out either side of the ship. Next I'll explain the rigging. Furs. Too many words. Zoro and Luffy yelled simultaneously. The butler jumped almost a foot into the air, not expecting the interruption, but recovered quickly. "Yes, of course." He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "I suppose you can go discover the rest for yourselves. If you have any questions afterward, don't hesitate to ask. I did design her after all," he said before bowing once more and moving to take his previous place behind Kaya. "You heard him," Kaya said lightly laughing. "Go see what else it has in store." Luffy didn't need to be told twice. "Let's go," yelled the boy, jumping from the dock to the boat. Nami smiled as she walked past Kaya and Mary to the ramp and up to the deck, Zoro following her closely. As she slowly stepped on the wooden planks of the ship she couldn't help her largening smile. Luffy's laughter echoing in the air was making it even harder. Time to go explore her new home for the next month or so. Nami was interrupted from the memory by Luffy yelling from his perch. "Guys! Quick! Come look!" Zoro set his weights down and walked to the stairs, wiping sweat from his brow. "What is it, Luffy?" the swordsman asked. He turned back to his weights and couldn't help but think he should probably put them up. He thought about it for a moment before deciding to do it later. Kaya had been nice enough to donate some of the stone mansion. Well, he hadn't asked, he just kind of cut and ran, literally. It was messed up anyways. She wouldn't miss it, probably. Regardless, he then used the stone to fashion some weights to lift. The stone was solid so they were nice and heavy just the way he liked them. Kaya had some nice walls. "Stop ogling those atrocities you call weights, musclehead. It's weird," Nami said as she passed the green-haired boy on the way up the stairs. The Verde scowled in return but held his tongue and followed behind the navigator to where their future captain was excitedly shouting. Well, his future captain, for now. "Luffy, what the hell are you on about?" the girl asked, reaching the top of the steps. The straw-hatted boy jumped up and down on the lamb figurehead he so loved and pointed out to the sea. "Look over there," he said excitedly, "it's a giant fish." "We just wanted to thank the chef that made our meal," the finely dressed gentleman said to the figure standing at the table. The woman across from him nodded her head in agreement. "Yes, it was so delicious I thought my soul was going to melt," she praised. The person they were talking to was a teenager of 18 years old. He was a slim, muscular, long-legged boy with blonde hair which he kept brushed over the left side of his face. Above his gray-black right eye was a very distinctive eyebrow that formed a clockwise spiral at the outer end. He wore a black double-breasted suit with golden buttons, a similarly colored tie, and a blue long-sleeved buttoned shirt. It all made for a very well put-together gentleman. Much to the surprise of the two customers, he was the sous chef of the restaurant they were currently in, the Bharati. The blonde had been working in the restaurant for most of his life and cooking for longer. He had a history with the head chef and it was how he'd ended up working there at such a young age. He wasn't always as good of a cook as he was now, but he'd learned a lot over the years and was a big help in opening the restaurant in the first place. Now he was a sous chef and he got to cook food for beautiful women every day. The teenager smiled to himself as blonde hair, the same color as his, flashed through his mind. The feeling of a woman praising his cooking would never change. It always felt the same as it did the first time. "Wonderful. It was my absolute pleasure, madam," said the chef suavely. He held his hand out to the woman and she instinctively placed her own into his. The blonde-haired chef removed the cigarette from his mouth and bent down to place a kiss on the woman's knuckle. "It's the world's gift to me, to be able to serve a beautiful woman like you," he said, gently releasing her hand and placing his cigarette back in his mouth. He then flashed her his best smile. "Please come back and see me again sometime." The man at the table stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor, and pointed an accusatory finger at the chef. "Don't you dare try to talk to her like duh." "Sit down, sir," yelled the blonde-haired teen. He sent the man a withering glare and said man stumbled back into his seat. "No one will tell me how I can talk to a woman." He turned back to the pretty lady and sent her a wink to which she blushed, looking down at her lap. Swinging his head back to the man and immediately sending another glare in his direction, he asked, "Would you like to know why?" The man only nodded. The chef turned away from the table and began to make his way to the open area in front of the entrance. "It's because I will only ever talk to women with the absolute love and respect they deserve." He stopped and the light from the window in the ceiling hit him in just the right way. He was suddenly shining with an ethereal glow and all the women in the restaurant couldn't help but be mesmerized. The chef turned toward the crowd and the light perfectly framed his one visible eye, a twirly eyebrow resting just above it. He flashed the room a slick smile. "The name is Sanji." The blonde paused and pointed dramatically at each of the women he could see, "And I dig the laddie." A loud crash interrupted the twirly-browed teen, the entire restaurant gasping as two arguing teenagers trying to get into the restaurant blasted the front door off its hinge. "Meet!" Luffy yelled as he and Zoro held each other in headlocks. "Booze!" The swordsman screamed back, smashing his forehead against the straw-hatted boys. Nami carefully followed the two idiots through the now destroyed entrance of the restaurant. As she stepped through it, she noticed how extensive the damage was. How the hell had they even done it? She shook her head in exasperation. However they did it, she so wasn't paying for it. "We are spending the last of my money on what I want," Zoro screamed in his friend's face. Neither of them even noticed the person laying under the doors they'd caved in. Nami's sweat dropped. They literally had both meat and alcohol back on the ship. "I'm the captain. You have to listen to me," Luffy argued back. "You wanted meat." "You're not the captain yet, dumbass," the swordsman yelled back with shark teeth. "Both of you, shut the hell up," Sanji raged from underneath the smashed-in door. "Damn those bastards." And just when he'd been about to make such a good impression on all the ladies too. He scowled to himself as he kicked the door in anger. It flew upward and smashed into the ceiling with a crash, but Sanji didn't care at the moment. He stood up, wiping the dust from his suit, and reached into his pocket to grab a new cigarette. Placing it between his lips, he lit it as he walked toward the two guys making a ruckus in his restaurant. Zeph was gonna be pissed about the door. His eyes glanced up at the ceiling. Shit. Zoro and Luffy paused in their screaming as the blonde-haired guy walked toward them. They glanced at each other before letting go of each other's necks and standing up straight to face the angry boy. "Where the hell do you two get off busting up the restaurant?" yelled Sanji as he found his way directly in front of the two. Zoro and Luffy looked at each other in silence before they each pointed a finger in the other's face. It was his fault, they said in perfect synchronicity. A tick mark appeared above Sanji's eye. "I don't give a shit who it was," I asked. "Where do you get off, Boosty?" Excuse me, Nami said from over Zoro and Luffy's shoulders. She put on her cutest face and continued. We're really sorry about the door. Could you please forgive us? Just this once? She finished it off by sticking her tongue out and winking at the blonde teen. Sanji felt an arrow pierce straight through his heart. He dashed to Nami's side, completely ignoring the two boys and kneeling before the orange-haired girl. My beautiful swan. There is nothing I wouldn't do for a goddess such as yourself. Consider it forgotten. As if it never happened in the first place. Sanji looked up from the ground and to the two brutes standing next to the orange-haired beauty, frowning, before turning back to the orange-eyed. My lady. First, may I have your name? Nami. The girl replied. She sweat dropped to herself. That had been really easy. She was totally right. The boy was a total sucker. She'd seen his type before. Just never so, over the top. She thought about it for a second before deciding that it was actually kind of cute. A perfect name for a perfect woman. Sighed the twirly-browed teen. He looked up into Nami's eyes. Secondly, I must ask, what has possessed you to bless these two brutes with your heavenly presence? A tick mark appeared on Zoro's forehead and Luffy began to laugh. Zoro. He called you a brute. The younger boy giggled. The twirly-browed guy was funny. He called you a brute too. You idiot, yelled Zoro with shark teeth. Luffy did like he usually did and just laughed harder, drawing more of Zoro's ire. Nami's sweat dropped at her two idiots. Just ignore them, she paused, looking for the blonde-haired boy's name. Sanji caught on and immediately Pravati lady. Sanji's a cute name. She flirted, winking at him. The chef's heart was speared with an arrow by the woman for the second time. Women were such wonderful creatures. These two are my bodyguards, so just ignore them, the girl said with a smile. The twirly-browed boy visibly relaxed. Of course someone as beautiful as her would have bodyguards. It was the kind of beauty that should be protected. What the hell are you talking about? Zoro stopped and held his head in pain as Nami lifted her fist from it. Don't worry about him, he's all muscle and no brains, said the girl. She smirked at the look of indignation resting on Zoro's face. Oh, sweet revenge. I see. Well, if it would please you so, I offer you and your brutes a table. It would mean the world to me if you'd let me cook for you, Sanji said. He glanced over at the two teens with the girl and scowled at them. I guess you two can eat as well. He wasn't very happy about it, but at least he would get to feed the beautiful orange-haired girl. Meat, exclaimed Luffy, jumping up and down. He was hungry and all the laughing was making it worse. Plus he wanted to see what the funny eyebrow guy could cook. Booze, Zoro yelled happily. Surely the dumb love-struck blondie would give him some booze to drink. He did offer to cook for them after all. Sanji scoffed at the two, now happy. Boys. You two will be paying for everything you eat or drink. He turned and looked at Nami, his eyes turning into hearts. Unlike you, Nami. Your meal will be on the house. Luffy and Zoro both screamed in outrage before freezing and slowly turning toward one another as if realizing something. They looked at each other for a moment before tick marks formed above both of their heads. The quiet was shattered as the two brought their heads back and smashed them into one another. Meat. Booze. Both of you shut the hell up, Nami screamed with shark teeth, smashing a fist over both of the boys' skulls. The two friends quieted as large bruise bumps formed on top of their heads, pouting from their places on the floor but complying nonetheless. Nami turned back to Sanji and replied to him, I'm flattered, Sanji. And I would love to try some of your cooking. She pointed to the two pouting boys on the floor. I'm sure they will have no problem paying for their meals. Isn't that right, boys? She shot them a menacing look and they both nodded their heads, gingerly touching their bruise bumps. Perfect, said the black-suited chef, standing and gesturing in the other direction of the dining room. If you would please follow me, I can show you to your table. Nami walked in the direction he gestured, to a table directly ahead. It sat against a wall with a port window, just above the table, shining light onto its white cloth. Sanji pulled out the chair at the head of the table and gestured for Nami to sit, to which she complied. Oh, and I almost forgot, said the black-suited chef, pushing the girl's chair in. Welcome to the Bharati. He bowed before standing and turning back in the direction of the kitchen. I'll go grab a bottle of wine for you to start off with, my lady. The teen spun on his heel with a giddy look on his face and headed toward the kitchen as Luffy and Zoro pulled out their chairs, sitting at the table. "Hey, I want meat," Luffy yelled at Sanji's back, banging his fork and knife on the table. "Where the hell did he keep getting those?" "I want some booze. Shouldn't be too hard for a server like yourself to get some for me," Zoro insulted. The damn cook was pissing him off. "Patty, Carne, come clean up all the shit at the entrance," Sanji yelled in the direction of his destination before turning back toward the table. "First of all, why is a piece of moss on your head?" he said, pointing at Zoro's green hair. "Second of all, I'm no damn server. I'm a chef." Zoro scoffed, trying to ignore the blonde's insult, more like Arrow chef. "The hell did you say?" Sanji growled. No one insulted his love for women. "Sanji," Nami sing-songed from her place next to Zoro, "I was really looking forward to that wine." She sent him a dazzling smile that had the chef wrapped right around her finger. "Your wish is my command, my swan," exclaimed Sanji, his eyes turning into hearts. He quickly disappeared into the kitchen to get the requested bottle of wine. He couldn't keep his queen waiting, after all. Nami's sweat dropped as the chef left the table. He was certainly excitable. "I like him, I think he's funny," Luffy laughed as he leaned against the wall. Pointing at Zoro, "He called you Moss Head." The Verde growled at his future captain. "That idiot chef shouldn't be throwing around insults when he's just a big perv." He'd seen the way he'd been ogling Nami and every other woman in the place. It didn't bother him for any other reason than it was just annoying as hell. That made Luffy laugh harder. "Hey, Nami, maybe you guys can go peeping together," exclaimed the straw-hatted boy, his laughter increasing dramatically as Nami's face glowed cherry red with anger. "You damn idiot," she screamed at him, "for the last damn time. I wasn't peeping," she huffed angrily and crossed her arms, looking away from the giggling boy. Sometimes he could be so irritating. Across the dining room, two men came out of the kitchen and couldn't help but gape at the state of the entrance to the restaurant. One of them was a stocky, average-sized man with brown hair and tan skin. He wore the classic Bharati uniform and a pair of sunglasses, even though he was inside. The other was a muscular man with somewhat oversized forearms. He had a prominent pair of lips on his face and his black hair formed an elaborate goatee around his chin. Instead of the classic uniform, like his companion, he wore a customized version of the restaurant's uniform consisting of a dark double-breasted shirt, matching shorts, and a white apron. The last thing of note was the pink ascot that hung around his neck, tied in a knot at the front. "What the hell happened here?" Patty screamed in outrage, throwing his muscular arms in the air and looking wildly around the restaurant. "The whole damn door is gone." He looked at the destruction and his eyes watered. Who would want to do such a thing to their precious Bharati? His eyes glanced up toward the ceiling and the tears came fully when he saw the front door stuck halfway into the wood above him. "I'll kill whoever did this." The man spat through his tears. "Calm the hell down, Patty. It was somehow probably Sanji's fault. I can bet you a woman was involved too," Carne said from Patty's side, scowling. "Well, no use in dwelling. Might as well get to fixing." He sighed looking at the work ahead of him. How the hell was it even their job? They were cooks for God's sake. He shook his head and grabbed Patty's sleeve. Time to get to work. Just as the two moved to grab the supplies they would need, Sanji walked back out of the kitchen holding a tray with a singular glass of wine and the bottle it was obviously poured from. He quickly but carefully weaved through the other tables and found his destination. "I hope I didn't keep you too long, my lady," the chef said from over Nami's shoulder. The girl turned from her conversation with Luffy and Zoro and smiled at the blonde. "Of course not. I'm still here, aren't I?" she joked. "I still need to try your cooking." She sent him a wink. "I'm sure it's wonderful." Sanji kept his eyes from turning to hearts, but it was a close thing. "I shall return to the kitchen then. When I get back, I will be carrying a meal fitting of a queen such as yourself," he promised, turning to head back to the kitchen. He had work to do. "Where's my meat?" Luffy moaned childishly as he lightly punched the wall he was leaning on. The stupid chef didn't bring him anything to eat. He was hungry, damn it. "And where the hell is my booze, twirly brow?" Zoro growled at the teen's back. "Stupid brutes," Sanji whispered to himself before turning back in the direction of the table. "I'll come back. Don't expect anything special." The chef turned away and practically ran back to the kitchen, beginning to plan what he was going to make for his beautiful orange-haired guest. "Sanji!" A gruff voice yelled from the front entrance. An older man was standing there looking at Sanji with black eyes that said they'd seen a lot over the years. The most noticeable thing about the man was his long mustache. He needed ribbon to tie the braided strands at both ends to keep it presentable. Along with the mustache, he also had a small blonde beard that covered his chin. His body was relatively muscular for someone of obviously older age. However, his right leg, from the middle of the thigh down, was made of wood instead of flesh and bone. A peg leg. He wore a classic white chef's uniform, with a matching apron tied at the waist, and around his neck hung a blue ascot. The most eye-catching thing about the man, besides his mustache, was the tall chef's cap he wore that was much taller than a normal one. The boy turned toward who he knew was the head chef. "What the hell do you want, you old geezer?" He wanted to get started on Nami's meal. He didn't have time for the old man. "What the hell happened to my restaurant?" the older man growled. Patty and Carne looked over the chef's shoulder with smirks. "That's right, Chef Zeph. It was his fault. He probably insulted some guy for getting too close to a woman and he got mad or something," the muscular armed man accused. "Maybe Sanji would think twice before making them clean up after him." Zeph didn't even turn to look at the two men, giving Sanji a hard look. "I didn't ask you two dumbasses," he said, over his shoulder, before addressing his sous chef. "Well, brat, what the hell happened?" The boy waved his hand dismissively and turned to walk the rest of the way into the kitchen. "Don't worry about it, old man." Patty and Carne were nice enough to offer to clean up. He knew just what he was going to make. An excited smile came over the boy's face as he thought about serving his orange-haired angel. "Oh, Nami Swan, you're going to love what I have in store for you." "We did not," the two chefs shouted angrily, interrupting the blonde. He turned and gave the two employees a withering glare. "Shut the hell up," he yelled. "Obviously I wasn't gonna clean it up. I'm a chef." He looked down his nose at Patty and Carne. "I don't do that kind of menial labor." "Like hell, you don't," the head chef replied before his two employees had the chance. "Patty, Carne, get back to the kitchen, we've got orders and I want them done yesterday." The two chefs saluted Zeph and moved quickly to walk past Sanji and into the kitchen. "Serves you right, kid," said Patty as he tried to shoulder-check the black-suited teen, Carne following closely behind. The blonde pulled his left side back, causing Patty to brush by him instead of their shoulders connecting, and the muscular man stumbled. Sanji jumped into the air and spun, smashing his foot across the back of both men's heads and sending them flying into the kitchen with a loud crash. The chef landed, clapping his hands together as if to get the dust off them, and gave Zeph a blank stare. That should show those two to listen. "You damn brat," the man growled, walking up to his idiot sous chef and grabbing him by the collar. "You're gonna clean all this shit up right now." He paused while he shoved Sanji toward the entrance of the restaurant. "I don't even know if it was you. And I honestly don't care. Just clean it up and stop making me look bad." The man turned away from Sanji and looked at the table he had come from, eyes narrowing as he approached the group sitting there. He cleared his throat when he arrived. "Excuse me." The three turned in curiosity toward the man who had interrupted their conversation. Momentarily forgetting his hunger, Luffy's eyes turned to stars. "How the heck do you get your mustache to stay like that?" the boy yelled enthusiastically. "It was so cool, it stuck out so far." Nami blushed, resisting the urge to smack the straw-hatted boy over the head. "You three wouldn't happen to know what happened to the entrance of my restaurant, would you?" the man asked, ignoring Luffy and gauging everyone's reactions. Nami rolled her eyes and immediately pointed at the other two occupants of the table, both of them staring at her in outrage. She certainly wasn't getting in trouble for something she didn't do. She turned, looking around the chef and in the direction of the entrance. Her eyes landed on Sanji and she sighed. Looked like the old man had gotten him too. She kind of felt bad. She'd be mad if she got hit by a door, too. "You two," the older man said, grabbing the boys by their collars, the same as he had with Sanji. "Get to help my idiot sous chef fix the damn door you broke." He turned back to Nami, still sitting at the table, and sent her an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry for not only taking your chef but your friends as well." The orange-it only laughed and smiled back at the man as held the two struggling boys in place. She had wine with her, she could wait on the food for a bit. Plus, a little peace and quiet might be nice. Maybe she could find a newspaper somewhere around the place. Don't worry about it, the Nami said, waving away the man's concern. Those two should learn to fix the things they mess up. Zeph smirked at the girl before turning back toward the entrance and dragging the two boys toward the mess they'd created. He'd been thinking the same thing. Who knows? He shot a glance at his blonde-haired sous chef. Maybe he would make a friend or two. The man sighed. Then maybe he would leave and go look for the all blue. He shook his head. Why the hell was he getting so sappy? The old chef threw the two boys toward the entrance and they tumbled on the ground, landing at Sanji's feet. Fix this shit quick or you'll regret it. He turned on his heel and walked back to the kitchen as the three boys' voices, arguing about how to start fixing the door, echoed in the background. Chapter 14. Good soup. Like this? Said Luffy, blankly looking at Zoro and Sanji and smashing the door against the entrance. No, don't force it like that, you're gonna break the door in half. The two boys screamed simultaneously. Flip it around. Don't just keep trying to force it in. You said to force it in? Luffy asked, turning toward the door and the entrance. He didn't think it would work, but they said to do it, so heave-ho. The sound of the door splitting in half echoed through the restaurant and the other patrons couldn't help but watch the spectacle in shock. He had just forced the door through the entrance, the wrong way. Luffy looked between the piece of door he held in his hands and the two other pieces on the ground. Looked like he was right. He knew it wouldn't work. A groan came from the ground in front of him and he looked down to see a person crawling toward the entrance of the restaurant. The man didn't look great, his eyes were bloodshot and his skin was pale. What the hell, Luffy? Sanji's voice came from the entrance behind the boy. You broke the damn door. We said don't fore. He halted in his tirade as his eyes landed on a figure crawling on the dock of the Bharati. Zoro stayed quiet, eyeing the crawling bag of bones as he walked past Sanji to stand beside Luffy. What? It was an apt description. He was a middle-aged man with black hair and a scruffy beard. His body was small and his clothes were in tatters. He only had on a pair of ripped black trousers and a similarly ripped white tank top. He looked unharmed for the most part other than his emaciated body, which was more than likely from lack of food. Please, the man begged. I don't have any money but I'm starving. A coughing fit overtook him and he waited a moment for it to subside. Please, the man continued, it feels like I'm dying. Sanji softly shouldered past Luffy and Zoro to kneel before the man on the ground. Can you make it to the back of the restaurant? He asked softly. If you can, I can promise you something delicious to eat. Free of charge. He smiled a comforting smile. No one deserves to know what it feels like to starve. Luffy and Zoro's eyes widened slightly at the blonde's words as they both came to the same startling realization. For him to be able to say that. The man on the ground sniffled as his eyes began to water. Thank you, young man. Thank you so much. He cried. I believe I can make it to the back on my own. He groaned, beginning to crawl once again. Sanji turned and the two boys eyed him as he walked toward them. They glanced at each other as he passed and the same thought went through their heads. There was a lot more to the chef than met the eye. The twirly-browed teen brushed past the other two boys and through the entrance, toward the kitchen. He had work to do. Luffy and Zoro looked away from Sanji's retreating form and back to the man crawling on the wooden planks of the boat restaurant. They nodded to each other. Luffy dropped the piece of the door he was holding and took his place on one side of the man. Zoro on the other. Carefully, they lifted him to his feet and the man sighed as he let some of his weight be carried by the two strong young men. No need for you to crawl all the way there, old man. Luffy smiled as they walked him to where Sanji had directed. A tick mark formed on the old man's head. Old? You damn brat, I'm on. A coughing fit overtook him and interrupted his raging. Whoa there, old man. Take it easy. We got it from here. The green-haired swordsman said evenly, not noticing the man's building anger. A second tick mark formed on his head, right next to the first. I said I'm only 4. Another coughing fit hit the man and his raging was interrupted once again. Luffy's eyes turned to stars. You're 400 years old? He questioned excitedly. He'd never met someone that old before? The man just couldn't take it anymore. I said I'm only 43, he screamed. Just as he finished, blood came gushing from his mouth as the largest coughing fit yet hit him. Geez. Ya didn't have to get so worked up about it. said Zoro like the man he was carrying hadn't just coughed up a huge amount of blood. 400 is really old, Luffy exclaimed. He'd completely ignored the man's outburst and the blood coming from his mouth, continuing forward without a care in the world. The man sighed in defeat, blood dripping from his lip. Just get me to the back of the restaurant, please. You got it, old man, the two boys yelled in sync. Sanji stepped into the kitchen and immediately began planning what he was going to make. He needed something light but also filling. The man's stomach likely couldn't take anything too rich right now. The boy walked the tiled kitchen floor to the pantry, ignoring all the bustle going on around. Two pairs of eyes watched as Sanji walked through the door to the food storage area. They looked at each other before stepping out of the kitchen to get a look at the entrance to the restaurant. When they saw that the door was still missing, they immediately turned and walked straight to the pantry, arriving just as Sanji was walking out with a bag of jasmine rice, tea leaves, various seasonings, spices, as well as a multitude of other garnishes. "Sanji!" yelled Patty. "Why the hell are you in here when the door still is?" He was interrupted as the blonde-haired chef's foot came colliding into his head for the second time in the day. Carne watched his partner be kicked into the pantry with wide eyes. A cloud of dust erupted from the door along with the sound of Patty hitting the back wall of the room. Sanji turned and gave the other man a glare. Carne's head began to ache where he'd been kicked earlier. He heard groaning coming from the food storage area and paled. Maybe it was best to just let Sanji do as he liked. You know what? Maybe he would even go fix the door. Yeah, that was a good idea. He really didn't like the look Sanji was giving him. The frightened chef turned on his heel and left his friend lying in the pantry. He would get him later. Right now, he had a door to fix. Sanji scoffed at the man's retreating form and got back to the matter at hand. The chef had decided on the meal he was going to create. He was going to make green tea on rice. The green tea would be light on the man's starving stomach and the rice in the dish would make it filling enough to be satisfying. The spices and seasonings would be easy, nothing too heavy, as the green tea would be doing most of the work. The blonde chef was a blur as he danced through the kitchen, gathering his ingredients while simultaneously prepping and cooking the multiple facets of the dish at the same time. The kitchen was Sanji's domain. He knew where everything was at all times, whether he was actively looking or not. It was second nature. Everything he needed was always within a hand's reach because he made it so. He was the master of his kitchen. The chef eyed the dish he had created thus far. It was almost finished, but it was still missing something. He remembered seeing an almost fully cleaned tuna sitting on the main counter as he walked in and was hit with an idea. He grabbed a pan and slightly oiled it with olive oil, bringing it to his desired heat. He could almost feel the flames of the stove as they brushed the underside of the cast iron pan. Sanji was always good on the stove. He knew their flames were hot, but he was never scared of them. They felt like the flames that burned in his heart. The flames that fueled his love for cooking and his love for women. The blonde teen let the pan heat as he turned and grabbed the tuna off of the center island. He turned the fish over on the cutting board, inspecting it to see what he could still use. Whoever had cleaned the tuna had done a superb job. All of the cuts were very precise. It had probably been Chef Zeph, and recently too. The fish was still very fresh. The man had always been good at cleaning fish. The thing was almost completely bare. Sanji eyed the head of the tund. Zeph had left the cheek. More than likely it was for an expensive order. The black-suited chef shook his head and grabbed his knife. He'd make it up to the old man later. The cheek of the tuna was the perfect garnish to his dish. Sanji gently sliced away at the head of the fish, not missing a single fiber of cheek meat. The tuna would provide the meal with much-needed protein and, with the right seasonings, would pair with the green tea and the rice very nicely. It helped that the cheek was very rich in flavor. He frowned to himself, pausing in his work for a moment. Would the tuna be too rich? The blonde gently grabbed the meat he'd butchered and began to cut it into thin strips, slicing the tuna thinly enough to be easily digestible but still managing to keep it thick enough to provide a good source of protein. He picked up his now sliced strips of cheek and laid them into his pan one by one, letting the tuna sear while he walked back to the pantry to retrieve a lemon. With the fruit in hand, he hurried back to the cooking area and quickly sliced it in half, squeezing the juice of one of the halves into the pan. It would help with the richness. The surface of the pan hissed and popped as the blonde flipped his tuna and let the other side cook. He looked at the top of the fish and almost swooned at the golden sheen of the lightly seared meat. The other side of the tuna finished searing and removed the fish from the pan to bring all the separate parts of the dish together. He laid a generous amount of jasmine rice into a bowl and slowly poured the green tea over it. As the steam from the tea wafted into the air, he finally laid the thin pieces of tuna on top of the rice, topping the bowl off with a handful of scallions and a few last touches of seasoning. Sanji stepped back and admired his dish for a moment. It was perfect. The chef filled up a glass of water, smiling to himself, before picking up the bowl of food and walking toward the door to the back deck. The man he wanted to feed was supposed to be waiting there. His feet took him to the door he was looking for and he pushed it open. The blonde's eyes squinted as the setting sun shone in his eyes. He looked around the back deck and it didn't take him long to find the person he was looking for. The emaciated man was leaning against the railing with his back facing the sea. His head was facing his lap and he slouched uncomfortably. As soon as Sanji walked through the door, the man's head perked up and a wonderful aroma hit his nose. He couldn't help himself as he crawled to the blonde chef on his hands and knees. "It smells so delicious. Please, kind sir. May I have some?" "Some?" asked Sanji, looking funnily at the man. The man paled. Was the young man going to torture him with the wonderful aroma of the food he was carrying? The twirly-browed teen shot him a kind smile and set the meal right in front of the man's face. "You get all of it." He stood to his feet, watching as tears sprang to the man's eyes. "Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for this meal." The man cried. He reached forward and grabbed the spoon Sanji had placed in the bowl, immediately digging into the dish served to him. He thrust the silverware into the tuna and his mouth salivated as it cut straight through like butter. He wasted no time in filling the rest of his spoon with jasmine rice and green tea, quickly bringing the now food-filled spoon to his mouth. Groans of ecstasy came from him as the bite of food slid down his throat. It was like a floodgate had been opened. He just couldn't help it as he shoved the food into his mouth as fast as he could. "Slow down. I don't want you choking on me," said Sanji. He watched the man for a moment before walking to the railing, seeing him acquiesce and slow down in his eating. The chef looked out to the sea as the memories of his run-in with starvation passed through his mind. How much pain and suffering not eating could cause. He sighed to himself. It was why he'd always fed anyone who was hungry, and why he couldn't leave the restaurant until he'd paid Zeph back for everything. The sounds of eating were the only noises made as the man finished his meal in silence. "What happened to you?" Sanji asked, hearing the sound of a spoon hitting the bottom of a bowl. The man belched something fierce and sighed as he stood up and leaned over the railing beside the man who fed him. He was suddenly feeling a lot better. "I was on a merchant ship." The man started, looking out to the blue water as the setting sun glinted off it. It all happened so fast. He took a deep breath before trying to explain further. "One second I was in my room getting ready for bed, the next, the ship was just exploding." Sanji looked at the man oddly. "Exploding? Like cannons?" he asked. He shook his head. "Not exactly. No." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Exploding may have been the wrong word. It was more like everything was crushed, which then caused everything to explode." "Crushed?" the blonde questioned. "What does that even mean?" The man fumbled for the right words, but he wasn't even sure the chef would believe the truth. And he knew it was the truth. He'd seen it with his own eyes. "Well, there were these chains," he mumbled, "giant ones. I think whoever used them may have." "May have what?" the blonde asked. "May have eaten a devil fruit," the man answered, eyeing the chef and trying to gauge his reaction. Sanji gave him a blank stare. "All right then, don't tell me." He waved him off. If the man was just going to lie, what was the point in asking? Devil fruits were a myth. "It's true, I swear. I don't know how, but those chains crushed our entire ship," the man exclaimed. "When I came to, I was the only one left there. The rest of the folks either left me or they're dead." He sighed. "I grabbed a hold of some of the wreckage and it's by sheer dumb luck that I ended up here." Sanji sighed much the same as the man beside him. Now that his job was done, time to go see what his Nami Swan was doing. "Well, now that you're fed, you are no longer my problem, old man." He turned away from the railing and began to walk back toward the door. It was the last straw. The man's face looked like it was on fire as he lit up in anger. That was the third person to call him that. He wasn't a damn old man. The black-haired man screamed and ran at Sanji's back, cocking his arm back to throw a punch at the chef's head. Without turning around, Sanji dodged the man's punch and stuck his leg out into the man's path. Not expecting the turn of events, the man tripped over Sanji's foot and rolled into the back entrance. The boy said nothing as he stalked up to the dazed form on the floor. He reared his leg back and kicked the man like a soccer ball. Right into the pantry. And right into a still knocked out Patty. Hadn't anyone ever taught him not to bite the hand that fed you? The man lost consciousness as his head slammed into the other man's and he couldn't help but think one last thing before he passed out. I hope I can eat his cooking again sometime. Sanji closed the pantry door, leaving the two men to continue resting, and walked back toward the dining room. He'd been away for far too long. Time to check in on his goddess. His eyes turned to hearts as his tornado legs carried him to his destination. If he would have stayed in the kitchen for just a moment longer, he wouldn't have missed the two figures, quietly sneaking their way back into the restaurant via the back door. One had green hair and two swords at his hip and the other wore a straw hat and a red vest. Wow, Sanji. You really can cook, Luffy shouted as he rubbed his large belly. He'd been starving. All that work fixing the door made me really hungry. He smiled in satisfaction as he looked around the table at the rest of the occupants. They were making funny faces. Especially Zoro and Sanji. You just broke it more. Their two voices yelled angrily at the boy, now blissfully rubbing his belly. That meat was I led to himself as he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes to ride out his food high, completely unaware of the yelling being directed at him. The food really was delicious, Sanji. Nami said as she dabbed the corners of her mouth with a napkin. The blonde-haired chef could really cook. She wouldn't mind having meals made by him more often. Said chef's eyes turned to hearts. Oh, my Nami swan. You always know what to say to make my heart beat faster, the boy swooned. I hate to give someone like you a compliment. Zoro scowled, interrupting Sanji's praise of the orange-haired girl. He couldn't even believe he was about to say it. But it was good. He brought his hands together over his plate and bowed his head. Thank you for making the stupid server cook this meal, Chef Zeph. Sanji's chair screeched against the wood floor as he stood and pointed an accusatory finger at the swordsman. You stupid mossball, for the last damn time, I'm a chef not a damn server. The blonde screamed with shark teeth. Sit down, brat. Zeph scowled in the direction of his sous chef before looking Zoro's way. Thank RNG, over there. He said, pointing his thumb in Nami's direction. She's the one that convinced my idiot sous chef. Nami pouted from across the table, crossing her arms in front of her. Chef Zeph. She whined, I told you. My name's Nami. She'd already told him multiple times and he had yet to call her by her name. She had a feeling he just liked teasing her. Her eyes glanced from the older man to the teen yelling at him then back and forth a few times. It was a little bit of a jump but maybe the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Luffy sighed as he watched all the interactions at the table. He loved being around friends. The straw-hatted boy looked at all of the people gathered until he eventually landed on the blonde-haired chef he had met earlier in the day. The interaction between Sanji and the starving old man really endeared the chef to the black-haired boy. Luffy had a soft spot for people like Sanji, good people. And now that he had tasted the chef's food, he knew for sure. He wanted him on the crew. Actually, he wouldn't have anyone else. That was how good his food was. Luffy wasn't any good at cooking, so he didn't know why it tasted so good but he knew it did and it was enough for him to want the other teen on his crew. Sanji, the straw-hatted boy exclaimed, getting the entirety of the table's attention. You should come be the chef on my pirate crew, the boy yelled excitedly. The reactions around the table were varied, to say the least. Nami had an odd look on her face like there was a part of her that was unsure about something. Zoro had a scowl on his face, looking as if his worst nightmare had just been confirmed. Chef Zeph showed no emotion for the most part, but Luffy thought he saw a sliver of something when he mentioned pirates. Sanji's reaction was strange. From what Luffy saw, for a moment, he looked like he might actually say yes. But wait. I thought you were just one of her bodyguards. The black-suited chef said, pointing in Nami's direction. The orange-haired girl blushed at being caught in her lie but recovered quickly. I'm so sorry for lying, Sanji. She cried. Can you ever forgive me? Nami shot him her best pout and waited for him to melt like putty. Nami Swan, he yelled in response, twirling over to her side. There is nothing you could say or do that would make me angry enough to not forgive and forget. And so it shall be done. It is forgotten as if it never happened in the first place. He stood from his place at Nami's side and walked back to sit in his chair. So, what'd you think? Luffy asked again. You gonna come be our cook? Sanji asked the straw-hatted boy. Surely his Nami Swan wasn't a part of this pirate crew, right? Luffy smiled and pointed to his friends. Yeah, Zoro's the first mate and swordsman, and Nami's our navigator. Temporary. Nami scowled in Luffy's direction. She had not agreed to be their navigator. They're helping me with something, and after it's done, we're all going our separate ways, she corrected. Sanji looked at Nami curiously. What exactly are they helping you with, if you don't mind me asking? Well, Nami said, shifting in her seat, we're going to steal from a pirate. A pretty strong one. At least I think he is. She pointed at Zoro and Luffy. These two are my muscle. She glanced back at Sanji and sent him a teasing smile. Honestly, if I was able to eat your meals every day, it would surely make the journey much more enjoyable. The orange purred. Goosebumps rose up all over Sanji's skin and, in the moment, he wanted nothing more than to say yes to the beautiful orange-haired goddess. However, he glanced over at Zeph, their eyes meeting momentarily, and he knew he couldn't, as tempting as the girl made it sound. I'm sorry, Nami, but I have to refuse. And I guess that means I'm refusing you too, Luffy. He said, looking down at his lap. He couldn't leave the Bharati yet, he still had much to repay. Zoro looked over to his captain to see if he would pull his signature trick, but was surprised when he didn't. The swordsman only saw a thoughtful look on his future captain's face. Weird. He wasn't usually like that. He glanced back at the stupid love cook and could see a similar look of thoughtfulness on his face as well. The swordsman shook his head. He wouldn't be upset about the cook not joining, but for some reason, he just knew the twirly-browed idiot would be their cook. Sometimes, luck wasn't always on his side. You brats got a place to sleep? Sounded Zeph's voice, interrupting the conversation. The three teens not living on the Bharati nodded their heads yes. Good. As much as I've loved this, the mustached man said sarcastically, it's time for this old man to go to sleep. He stood from his chair and grabbed the plates at the table, preparing to take them to the kitchen to be washed. Thank you for fixing the door as I asked. I would say it's been a pleasure, but honestly, the two of you have been a pain, he exclaimed, pointing at Luffy and Zoro. What the hell? Zoro said in outrage, pointing at Sanji accusatorially. What about him? He questioned, pointing at Sanji. He's always a pain. A pain I've gotten used to over the years. You too, however. Your new pain. The old man turned to the only girl in the group, however, out of everything today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Nami. The chef smirked as he made his way out of the dining room without looking back. The girl blushed slightly but managed to cover it up until it subsided. She looked up just as the older man disappeared into the kitchen. The apple really didn't fall far from the tree. Sanji watched the chef retreat and turned to the table to say his goodbyes. I must bid thee farewell, my sweet Nami. It pains me that I will not be able to travel with you and feed you your every meal. But alas. He turned away and put the back of his hand on his forehead, looking up at the ceiling. It wasn't meant to be. The blonde-haired chef didn't turn back as he followed the head chef into the kitchen. Maybe if things were different, he could have said yes. As of this moment, however, he couldn't. Just as he went to step through the door to the kitchen, a voice stopped him. I'll be back here tomorrow morning. Luffy said, standing from his place at the table. Tomorrow, I'm gonna ask you again. He turned and walked toward the entrance, Zoro and Nami following closely behind. You're gonna be my cook. If it doesn't happen tomorrow, then I'll be back after we finish stealing the treasure for Nami. And then I'll stay until you agree. The straw-hatted boy didn't wait for a reply as he turned and walked out of the fixed door? When the hell had that happened? Sanji heard the black-haired teen's words and scoffed as he walked all the way into the kitchen. As much as he wanted to, it would take a lot to get him on their ship by tomorrow morning. Over to the washing area Zeph had placed the dishes in inside. A very large stack of plates and a multitude of bowls rested in the sink. The man probably left them there for him on purpose. Stupid geezer. The blonde rolled up his sleeves and lit a cigarette as he got to work, oblivious to the pair of eyes watching him from the stairs to the rooms above. Sanji sighed as he dried the last plate. Finally, he looked down at his hands while he dried them off. Nice and pruny. The blonde threw the towel over his shoulder and walked tiredly to the back door. He would go to bed, but he still needed to finish his smoke. Plus, his hands really needed to dry out. He grasped the door knob and pulled open the door, quietly walking through it and closing it behind him. The chef walked to the opposite side of the deck to lean over the railing and get a good look at the sea. The crescent moon hung high in the sky, reflecting off the glassy surface of the water, and the wind blew warm air lightly across his skin. The boy breathed in deeply and his nose was filled with the wonderful smell of the salt water all around him. Sanji smiled to himself. He loved the sea. Somewhere inside of it, his dream lay, waiting to be discovered. Someday he would find it. Sanji's thoughts drifted for a while before they settled on dinner and the offer Luffy had given him. If he was being honest with himself, he wanted to go. He really did. He wanted to go and find it. The All Blue. He knew that if it existed it had to be on the Grand Line somewhere. He'd always loved hearing stories of the place. Zeph even talked with him about it from time to time. His thoughts trailed off and he sighed to himself. He wanted to go, but he owed it to the old man to stay. He'd given up too much for him to just up and leave. "The hell are you doing out here, brat?" A voice sounded from over the boy's shoulder. Sanji turned to the owner of the voice and scoffed, not all that surprised by who stood there. "I could say the same to you, geezer." Zeph didn't reply, simply walked to the place next to Sanji and looked out at the water, the same as his sous chef. Silence reigned for a moment before it was broken by the older of the pair. "Don't waste your life here," the man said softly, still looking out to the sea. Sanji didn't have an answer besides shock and a hint of anger. Where the hell had that come from? And how the hell could he say that? How could he say that he was wasting his life here? Was it a waste of his life to pay back the debt he owed? He didn't think so, but apparently Zeph might. "Those brats asking you to sail with them," started the older chef, still not looking at the teen. "I think you should go." Sanji grit his teeth in anger. "You want me to just up and leave? You really think I could just do that?" he seethed. "After everything I've taken from you? You really think I can just go out and sail with that kind of weight around me?" Where was all of this even coming from? It was all so out of the blue. Zeph never usually talked like this. "This isn't a prison, Sanji," Zeph yelled, turning in the direction of the blonde and looking him dead in the eyes. "You didn't take shit from me and you don't owe me a damn thing." He hated talking the way he was, but he didn't see another way. He wanted Sanji to go out there and chase his dreams. Not only for the boy himself but also for the old man who, to this very day, still dreamed of seeing the All Blue. "You want to repay me, brat?" he asked, continuing to give Sanji a hard stare. "Then get out there and find that damn ocean." Goosebumps rose up all over Sanji's body. The way the geezer had said it made it sound more like an order than a request. His thoughts were a whirlwind as he tried to decide how to reply. A part of him wanted to comply. To just say yes and be done with it. Another part of him, however, was still clouded by the weight of the invisible debt he still held over himself. His mind was in utter turmoil. "I'll make this easy for you. You're gonna get on those brats' ship," Zeph ordered in a commanding tone, watching his idiot sous chef's mouth open and close like a fish. He glared at Sanji when he made to interrupt and the boy held his tongue. "You're gonna get on that ship and help those three steal that treasure." He paused, turning away with a sigh, and looked back out to the sea. "After that, the girl said they were splitting up. When that happens, you make your choice." Sanji followed Zeph's example and looked out over the moonlit water. His brain was starting to catch up little by little. "And if I decide I want to stay here?" The old chef turned away from the water and leaned his back against the railing, heavily. He was too old for this sappy shit. Too much effort. "You won't hear another peep out of me." The man sighed. It was a compromise, but for some reason, that kid in the straw hat. He just had a feeling about him. Life on the sea had taught him to always trust his instincts. And they were telling him that the kid would lead Sanji to their dream. He just knew it. It was why he decided to talk to Sanji in the first place. The black-suited teen quieted for a moment as he thought. It wouldn't likely be for very long, Nami said, maybe a month. Thinking of Nami, the blonde's nose began to bleed. He would be basically living with her for that whole time. At that thought, his mind was basically made up. He sucked the blood back up into his nose and faced Zeph once again. "Alright, geezer. Fine." He complied. "I'll go. But don't expect me to just give this place up when I get back." Sanji turned back toward the door and stomped his way back into the restaurant, effectively ending the late-night conversation. Zeph watched the teen walk away for a moment before turning back toward the water with a small smile on his face. He thought back to his own time out on the high seas as his old crew flashed in his mind. Maybe he would take some time and read his logbook before he went to bed. He hadn't opened it in a while. Yeah. That was exactly what he was going to do. He'd done all he could do for the brat, the rest was up to him. The old man began to follow Sanji back inside, walking toward the door. "Live your life, Sanji," he whispered into the air in front of him. He paused and turned, looking at the moon one more time with a smile. Once he's been out there for a while, he won't be able to stay here any longer. The aged man's gaze pushed past the moon and he smiled to the heavens above. Isn't that right, guys? Chapter 15, Cannonballs and Raindrops. Luffy, Zoro, and Nami walked up to the front door of the Baratie yawning and still trying to wake up. The sun had barely risen over the horizon in the east and the moon was still visible in the slowly brightening sky. "I slept amazing," Luffy exclaimed, stretching his sleepy muscles out as they walked the wooden deck. Zoro couldn't help but agree with his future captain's sentiment. The Mary was very homey and a great place to sleep. "Your snoring doesn't even bother me when I sleep on that ship," the swordsman teased. Luffy turned to his green-haired friend in mock outrage. "Zoro, how could you? I do not snore." His two companions lightly laughed at the humor in his voice. It was strange, but Nami agreed with the two boys. She didn't say anything as her laughs petered out, however, she couldn't deny the fact that since she'd been on the boat, she hadn't had a single nightmare. The girl looked over at the two boys, now conversing between themselves, and smiled. She'd been with them for close to a month now and couldn't help but think maybe they also had something to do with her lack of nightmares. A part of her wondered if the bad dreams would come back when they separated. Separate? Nami shook her head to rid herself of the thought. She couldn't deal with all the conflicting feelings right now, it was too early. The three companions reached the door and Luffy wasted no time in pushing it open, softly this time. "Welcome to the Bara." The teen paused when he saw who was coming into the restaurant. Sanji quickly shouldered past the two boys, rushing to Nami's side and kneeling before her. "Nami Swan," the blonde chef exclaimed, hearts taking over his eyes. "Your beauty shines especially bright this fine morning. It looks like you slept well." Luffy laughed as he jumped up and down excitedly. He really wanted Sanji to go with them. "So you're coming, right?" he asked the young chef, immediately cutting to the chase. Sanji looked away from a smiling Nami and to the straw-hatted boy, standing from his crouched position. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before replying. "Yes," he said simply. Luffy hooped and hollered in joy. He just knew he was gonna get him on the crew. "I'm only staying until we get Nami that treasure," the blonde added. The straw-hatted teen immediately stopped and his celebration turned into a pout. "No fair RR," he moaned. The blonde chef crossed his arms. "Well, that's the deal. If you don't like it, I'll just Santa." "Shut the hell up and get outta here, brat. I told you, y'all weren't working this morning. You got places to be," came a gruff voice from behind them. Sanji turned and the other three looked over his shoulder to see Chef Zeph standing in the doorway to the kitchen. "You three bring him back in one piece, now. Or don't. I don't really care." The old man waved them off and turned to walk back into the kitchen. There was prep that needed to be done and with Sanji gone. "Patty, Carne, get your asses up and in the kitchen," the man yelled. "I'll be back in a month, geezer," Sanji said to the retreating man, giving his back a hard stare, "and as of right now, I'm coming back as your sous chef." The old chef said nothing, simply waving his hand in dismissal as he continued into the kitchen. Sanji scoffed and turned to the three people he would be calling crewmates for the next little while, eyes drifting over each one of them. It would certainly be interesting, that was for sure. "Let's get outta here. I already prepped everything I'll need for the journey," the blonde said, walking through the group to the door. "Oh." He turned as he grasped the handle and sent Luffy a big smile, "and thanks for having me on board." "Sanji, Zeph's voice angrily shouted from the kitchen, "Why the hell are there two unconscious men in my pantry?" The blonde-haired boy paled. He must have kicked them harder than he thought. Sanji opened the door as fast as he could and proceeded to quickly run behind the group, pushing them all through the entrance. "Let's get to your ship, guys. No need to waste any more time here." The chef laughed nervously. "Time to go." "Sanji," Nami yelled from a chair on the front deck. "It's so hot out here, today. You wouldn't mind making something to cool me off, would you?" she asked, a hint of mischievousness to her voice. "Your wish is my command, Nami Swan," the blonde chef replied as he twirled his way down the stairs and to the opposite side of the ship. "Meat. I want meat," yelled Luffy's voice after the chef's retreating form. He was currently lying on the figurehead of their ship in front of where Nami was suntanning. Zoro lightly set his barbell down on the wood of the Mary, so as not to hurt the vessel. He looked up as Sanji climbed the stairs to the galley. "Hey, cook. Get me some booze while you're at it, nothing like a good drink after a workout." The hearts dropped from Sanji's eyes and he stopped in place, turning and scowling in the Verde's direction. "You've got legs. Get it yourself, mosshead." A tick mark formed over the swordsman's brow. "You're already gonna be in there. Just grab a bottle of sake," he argued angrily. "Stupid arrow chef. I said, you can get it yourself." The blonde turned away from the green-haired swordsman, ending the conversation, and walked through the door to the galley. "Meat, meat, meat," Luffy's voice yelled once again as he lazed about on his spot. Yeah, I'll make you something, Luffy," Sanji yelled back across the ship as he disappeared through the doorway of the galley. A second tick mark formed on Zoro's head. The damn chef wasn't making Luffy move. Why the hell did he have to? The swordsman huffed angrily and began making his way toward the galley. He really needed that drink now. Just as he moved to make his way up the stairs to his destination, he was interrupted by a huge splash off the left side of their ship and immediately turned in the direction of the sound. The Verde's eyes widened slightly at what his vision was met with before a grin overtook his lips. Luffy's form landed beside Zoro's as Nami's footsteps quickly came down the stairs, and the three looked out over the railing of the ship, their eyes settling on a pirate ship sailing in their direction. How they hadn't seen it sooner. Well, it wasn't that unimaginable. Everyone on the Mary had been very absorbed in what they were doing. "You guys get to handle them," said Nami, nonchalantly making her way back up the stairs to where her chair rested. She'd seen Zoro and Luffy deal with a giant wolf. What were a couple of small-time pirates? Sanji came out of the galley in a flurry. "Nami, I have your food. I made you a strawberry parfait. It should taste wonderful in this sun," the boy exclaimed, making his way down the stairs and throwing the other boys their requested items. Luffy jumped without looking and turned his head at the last second to catch a large piece of meat in his mouth. He had great instincts and they were even better when it came to food. He gently landed and began chewing on his snack while he watched the ship that had shot at them in anticipation. Zoro lifted his hand and caught an unopened bottle of sake. "You didn't do anything weird to this, right?" the swordsman asked, only half joking. Sanji scoffed at the Verde's words. "You wish, mossball." He ignored the tick mark that appeared over Zoro's brow and looked out over the railing. "Looks like they're getting closer, Luffy." The first was probably just a warning shot. The blonde looked at Luffy and could only see one thing in his eyes. Excitement. He smiled and headed up the stairs leading to Nami. "Here you are, Nami," Sanji said reverently, bowing to hand the girl her snack. "Thank you, Sanji," she replied, reaching up to grab the parfait from the chef's hands. She looked up at his eyes teasingly. "Are you going to sit with me while I enjoy it?" Blood trickled down to the opening of Sanji's nostril but he quickly sucked it back up. He wanted Nothies and watch Nami eat the food he'd made her. Especially because of what she was wearing. He reluctantly turned away from the orange-haired beauty, his heart breaking the whole way. "I'm sorry, my Nami Swan. But I must refuse this time." He looked out toward the steadily approaching pirate ship before looking back at her and smiling. "I've got to prove that I can be useful while I'm here." He turned and began his descent back down the stairs, smirking along the way, and not just as a cook. Nami's eyes widened slightly. Was he saying he could fight? She'd asked him to sit with her because she thought he was just a cook. It was yet to be seen, but the way he spoke. It made her think Sanji might actually be strong too. Like Luffy and Zoro. Either that or he had an abundance of overconfidence. She hoped it was the former. She certainly wasn't going to be upset about another strong person trying to help her out. The ship was finally in range to hit the Mary, and the enemy wasted no time in waiting to attack. 3 cannons fired one after the other, launching deadly iron projectiles directly at the 3 teens who stood on the deck. "Time to have some fun, guys," said Luffy, tossing his meat bone into the water and smiling as he watched the cannon fire approach him and his friends. "I got the one in the middle." Zoro grinned as he drew Wado and Kitetsu. "I got this one, over here on the right." Sanji sighed as he lit his cigarette and took a puff, tapping the toe of his right shoe on the deck. "Guess that leaves me with the left." Luffy watched the cannonball move toward him and couldn't help but think that it was kind of slow. Forest Guy had been way faster. The boy put his hand out in front of his body with his palm open. He still couldn't use haky, so what he was planning would probably hurt a bit. It would be easy if he could at least use enhancement. It was hard to explain, but any time he used armament haky, he felt like he did right after his fight with Forest Guy. Minus the broken bones. It just made him feel exhausted. The exhaustion didn't usually last very long, a couple of hours give or take, but it had already been close to a month since his fight. How much longer would this bout of haky exhaustion last? Luffy kept his eyes on the cannonball as it connected with his palm, bracing for the pain that was surely coming. After feeling the impact, the straw-hatted teen's eyes widened. His hand. It didn't hurt. At all. He slid back a couple feet as the momentum of the projectile pushed against him, but stopped quickly, looking at his hand griping the smoking iron ball in amazement. He didn't think he could do that without getting at least a little hurt. How was his body this sturdy without haky? The reason that it stops itself from using armament haky is that it's adapting. The words flashed through the black-haired boy's mind seemingly out of nowhere, but they made everything click. His body was adapting. It was getting stronger so he could use more armament haky. Luffy couldn't help the laughter that burst from his lips as he tossed the cannonball in his hand up and down. Things were making more sense now. He looked between the iron ball and the approaching ship and his laughter grew. A few stories of Garp the hero came to mind while he began to test the weight of the cannonball in his hand. Gramps was a big fan of tooting his own horn, especially to his grandsons. Zoro grinned while he drew his katanas, watching the cannonballs approach with the same thought as his future captain, slow. His muscles bulged as he crossed his arms in front of his body. He'd never cut metal before, but what did it matter? Wado and Kitetsu vibrated wildly in his hands and one voice of 3 different tones sounded through his mind, cut. The swordsman tightly gripped his swords and slashed outward with all his might. The blades found the equator of the iron sphere and sliced right through the solid metal like butter. The 2 pieces of iron they'd created flew past the Verday's head and over the opposite railing of the boat, splashing into the water on the other side. Sanji's blonde hair shadowed his usually visible eye. How dare they? How dare they put his goddess in danger? It felt like his body was getting hotter. The flames. They were burning hot. His foot began tapping faster. He would keep his Nami swan safe. All to receive her love and praise. Without another thought, the chef crouched and launched upward. The cannonball sailed toward his figure and he slammed his foot into the projectile as he flipped through the air, knocking it into the ocean below. The blonde teen softly landed back on the deck of the Mary and felt a twinge in the top of his right foot, testing his weight on it. Determining that it was nothing serious, as far as he could tell, he shrugged. Probably just a small bruise. What? He had strong feet. Sanji sighed to himself and looked to see how the other 2 had handled their balls. The crew of the enemy ship scrambled to reload the 3 cannons. Had what they'd seen actually been real? One kid caught one. A cannonball, another, cut one. A solid iron cannonball. And the last. He kicked it. He kicked a cannonball. The captain of the crew was so shocked by the turn of events that he didn't even have the good sense to call for a retreat. He could only stare at the deck of the lamb-headed ship he thought would surely be easy loot, literally shocked senseless. Luffy? Sanji asked, watching the straw-hatted teen loosen up his right shoulder. What the hell are you doing? They really didn't have time for stretching. The pirates were surely going to fire another volley soon. Zoro took his eyes off the enemy ship momentarily to curiously glance at his future captain after hearing the cook's words. I used to hear stories about a guy that could throw a cannonball faster than any cannon. Luffy explained, cocking his arm back and gripping the iron ball in his hand with all the strength he could muster. He sent his friends a smile and laughed. It always sounded like fun. The straw-hatted boy's arm shot through the air with a small boom and he released the iron projectile in the direction of his attackers, so I thought I'd try it out. Zoro and Sanji barely saw the metal ball as it came out of Luffy's hand. They followed it to the pirate ship, watching in fascination, as it hit one of the cannons and caused a ridiculous chain reaction. The crack from the impact echoed loudly around the area and the cannon was thrown into the mast with enough force to easily snap the thick wooden beam in two. The cannon had been lit not half a second earlier and it fired as it connected with the wood, right into one of the other cannons. The cannonball glanced off of the other cannon and created a small spark that somehow, someway, reached a barrel of gunpowder. The rest of the gunpowder was in the storage area under the deck. But when one goes, everyone on the Going Merry jumped in surprise when a chain of fiery explosions ripped through the entirety of the ship that had attacked them. Luffy gaped as he watched the men abandon their burning ship in fear for their lives. There wasn't much left of it in the first place and what was still there wouldn't be for much longer. He looked down at his hand and then to the now flaming boat. Laughter beginning to bubble in his chest. That was. His excitement got the better of him and he thrust his hands out to his sides, looking up to the sky, so cool. The pirates in the water looked up to the deck of the small boat and couldn't help but be frightened. The kid that had just destroyed their entire ship was laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. To be honest, the laughter actually sounded like genuine happy laughter rather than a maniacal evil sort of laughter. Honestly, it might have even made the whole situation even scarier. How could you? A man hanging onto a piece of driftwood yelled from the water. How could you just destroy our ship like that? Upon closer inspection, ITHE group of pirates. Well, he was wearing a captain's coat at least. The three teens walked to the railing of the Mary and looked into the water at the man crying over his destroyed ship. They looked at each other for a moment before looking back and giving the distraught pirate captain a blank stare. Your fault. They all said at the same time, turning away from the man now crying even harder. You reap what you sow. The man glared through his tears up at the retreating forms of the three teenagers. They would pay. Oh yes. As soon as he found dry land and a den mushi, he would have his revenge. He wanted to see the lamb-headed ship burn. And burn it would. The Don would be receiving a call soon. Nami, Luffy called, excitedly running up the stairs to reclaim his place on the lamb figurehead. Did you see me throw that cannonball? The orange-haired girl scoffed. I don't think I could have missed any of that if I wanted to. Never seen someone blow up a ship like that before, Zoro said as he made it to the top of the stairs. Sanji quickly shouldered his way past the green-haired swordsman. Nami Swan? Are you okay? You're not hurt or anything, are you? The chef gave the girl a once-over. Only to determine if she was okay, of course. Nothing more. He certainly wasn't looking just because she had a bikini on. Certainly not. Nami watched him ogle her in amusement before bringing her fist into the air and smashing it down on top of the boy's head. Peep shows don't come free, my sweet Sanji. The orangeette lifted her smoking hand from Sanji's head and the boy passed out on the spot. He seemed to be in bliss as his consciousness faded from the world. A lewd smile on his face and blood flowing heavily from his nose. Serves him right, scoffed Zoro, eyeing the perverted blonde chef out cold on the floor. He looked from the chef to Nami, preparing to ask a question, but was interrupted by a cry for help from the water. The swordsman walked to the railing and looked below. Shut the hell up. You shot first. He flashed the man a glare and it seemed to do the trick of silencing him. The Verde huffed and turned around, addressing Nami again. We've been sailing for. He began to count on his fingers. Almost 2 weeks. The girl interjected, we've been sailing for a week and 5 days. She stood from her chair and looked in the direction of their destination. Before we left Syrup, I said it would take 5 weeks to get to the next island to restock. It would have taken another week from there to make it to our destination. She smiled appreciatively at their ship, but, now that we don't have to stop anymore, we've been sailing straight to Mad Treasure's hideout since we left. Thinking about it now, it was really lucky that the Bharati was where it was. They probably would have missed it otherwise. So how much longer, do y'all think? Luffy asked from his crisscross position on the ship's figurehead, still slightly giggling at the sight of the passed-out chef on the deck. 2 more weeks of travel if the winds are good. If they aren't, we're probably looking at something like 2.5 to 3. The girl answered, looking up to the sky and trying to get a feel for the winds. Zoro nodded to the girl and grinned to himself as he looked out past the horizon. He could wait that long. Drawing his swords had made him itchy to fight, and Luffy had stolen all the fun. Until then, maybe he would do some sparring with him. Hell, he could even get the arrow cook. It might be fun to smack him around a little bit. With his question answered, the swordsman turned on his heel and headed down to the storage room. Time to lift some more weights. "Hey, Nami," Luffy said, standing from his spot and jumping down to stand next to the girl in question. "What, Luffy?" she asked in reply. The orangeette gently sat back down on her chair and leaned back, pushing the sunglasses on her head back down to cover her eyes. She wanted to use the last of the sun's rays to finish tanning. Nami lay there quietly while she waited for Luffy to say something, opening her eyes and lifting her sunglasses once again when he didn't. "Luffy?" she asked, cautiously. She did not like the look on his face. Not one bit. Luffy grinned as a laugh bubbled in his chest. "Swim time." Nami's eyes widened in fear, her brain immediately registering what he meant by those words. "Luffy, don't you dare," she screamed, trying her hardest to scramble out of her chair and get away from him. The straw-hatted boy wasn't going to let his prey escape so easily. He ran over to his future navigator in the blink of an eye and picked her up in a bridal carry. "Hang on tight," Luffy whispered into the girl's ear. He laughed at the blush that spread across her cheeks and sprinted directly to the railing of the ship. Nami screamed her reluctance, her arms tightening around his neck, but the laughing boy would not be stopped. His foot found the top of the rail and he shot into the air with one last word: cannonball. "Luffy, get your ass back on the ship. Right now," Nami screamed over the railing of the Going Merry. Her clothes were soaked and she would much rather be inside enjoying one of Sanji's hot meals, but the storm was keeping her busy. Very busy. It didn't help that Luffy had decided that now was a good time for a swim. The storm had just begun to really pick up and he just dove off the ship, laughing and spouting something about good training. "What, Nami, did you say something?" Luffy's voice called back. The orangeette could barely hear the boy over the rain and booming thunder. She squinted and tried to look for where the voice had come from, but it was almost impossible. Nami screamed in frustration, turning away from the sea and deciding to leave Luffy to his own devices. She could only hope he didn't get lost somewhere out there. The currents were ridiculously strong right now. But then again, so was Luffy. "Zoro, Sanji," Nami yelled to the 2 boys below. "I need you to make sure none of the rigging snap. This storm is already setting us back and I can't waste any more time." The 2 immediately complied and set to work. In situations like these, they both knew that listening to their navigator was always the best course of action. The orange-haired girl huffed angrily to herself as she turned to look in the direction they were trying to go. The sky was filled with dark clouds and pouring rain as far as the eye could see. Nami had to resist the urge to scream again. She'd been so caught up in getting to Mad Treasure's hideout as quickly as possible that she'd ignored her intuition. The winds had been so good up until now that she'd ignored the signs. If she was thinking straight, they probably would have saved time in the long run by just sailing around it. Now look where they were. For some reason, it made her so frustrated. Actually, everything recently had been frustrating her, but this was just the cherry on top. The sea was supposed to be her domain, the weather her tool. In her haste, she'd ignored her instincts and now it was costing her. She was angry with herself, more than anything. She didn't have the time to be stuck in this storm. Kokoyashi didn't have time for her to be stuck in this storm. The orangeette looked up to the sky and was unable to hold in her scream of frustration any longer. She dropped her gaze down to her hands and sunk to her knees, silently raging as the rain poured all around her. Tears welled up in her eyes and it took everything she had to keep from crying. What the hell was going on with her? "Hey!" The girl didn't even have it in her to look up at who she knew was Luffy. "Go do something to help Sanji and Zoro," she said, dejectedly, keeping her eyes glued on her pruny hands. How had he even gotten back on the ship? She felt the straw-hatted boy kneel by her side and place a hand on her shoulder without a word. the gesture almost forcing the unshed tears from her eyes. Luffy had no clue what was upsetting her, but he still somehow knew she was upset, feeling that he knew it wasn't just due to the storm either. After being with him for so long, she eventually realized that he was more aware of things than she first thought. She subconsciously leaned into his arm and couldn't help but think that it felt nice to have someone worry about her, even if they didn't really understand anything. Suddenly, two more hands landed softly on her other shoulder and Nami couldn't stop the wave of tears that rushed from her eyes. The girl screamed at herself in her head for being so weak. She'd managed to keep it together for all these years, so why now? Why was it that the closer they got to Mad Treasure's Island, the harder everything was to bear? "You're not doing this alone," Luffy said, his voice just barely audible above the pounding of the rain. A shocking revelation shot through Nami like a bolt of lightning the second she heard the words leave his mouth. The closer they got to Mad Treasure's Island, the closer she got to being alone. Again. All of the memories the girl had made over the last month flashed before her tear-stained eyes. All of the moments she shared with them over their time traveling on the sea. All of the laughs Luffy had squeezed out of her. All of the scowls she'd sent Zoro. Meeting Kaya and Usopp. Being saved 3 different times now. Even spending time with Sanji over the last 2 weeks. As these memories played through her mind, the girl began to realize something insane. This was the happiest she'd been since before her mother died. Nami wailed in anguish, tackling the 3 boys next to her in the fiercest hug she could muster. She didn't want it to end yet, she wasn't ready. She didn't know if she would ever be ready and, honestly, that thought scared her more than anything. "Until then, don't tell me what your dream is. I don't want to know until you agree to be a pirate with me." Luffy's words flashed through her mind and her heart began to beat faster in her chest. Maybe. Thunder cracked in the air and Nami was jolted back to her senses. She chided herself. There was still no way she would ever be a pirate. Even with them. However, even as the thought crossed her mind, she made no move to stand or release the boys from her arms. For some reason, laying there with them, with her friends, it just felt right. The ache in her heart began to subside as the warmth of the large bodies surrounding her seeped into her skin. Well, 2 large bodies. Luffy was actually a little smaller than her. But his warmth, it was just as fierce as the other 2. The tears flowing from the girl's eyes stopped and the feeling slowly overtook her entire body. Everything felt so good. The forms in her arms, the forms of her friends. Even the rain. Actually, especially the rain. Nami's eyes snapped open. The rain. The night Kuro had almost killed her was still extremely hazy, and if she weren't in the current conditions, she wasn't sure she would have remembered it at all. The rain that night. She still couldn't remember exactly how events played out right before Luffy and Zoro saved her, but she was beginning to remember the rain. The rain had felt the same that night as it did now. But why? She racked her brain for a reason, but the event was still too hazy for her to remember anything that would give her an answer. The Orange's eyes closed once again and she was brought out of her thoughts by new sensations. She kept her eyes closed and released the 3 boys from her hug, slowly standing to her feet. It was strange, even though she had her eyes closed, she could still see in a way. The raindrops. Somehow, she could feel them. In a word, it was beautiful. She couldn't see anything but she could feel everything. Nami couldn't help but smile toward the sky as the raindrops painted a perfect picture of the world, just for her. "Nami?" Luffy asked curiously from over the girl's shoulder, "You alright?" An interesting anomaly in the flow of the rain caught the girl's attention before she could reply. One area was blowing in the opposite direction of the storm around it. How something like that was possible, the Orange didn't know. However, she did know that she wouldn't be missing the golden opportunity. "Luffy, Zoro, I need the 2 of you to get ready to unfuel the sail. Wait until I tell you to. Sanji, go to the WHIPSTAFF and steer US portside. I'll tell you when to stop and straighten out." Nami screamed over the pounding rain. The 3 teenage boys immediately set out to do their respective jobs without a peep. They knew not to argue with Navigator Nami. Said Navigator turned to face the sea once again. She didn't really understand what was going on with her, but she was thankful for it. She was thankful for the rain. That made 2 times now. The girl opened her eyelids and the world made of raindrops disappeared. As a test, she immediately closed them again and was relieved when the feeling of being one with the rain returned. Peace. Satisfaction. Togetherness. They were all things she felt while she kept her eyes closed and, funnily enough, they were all feelings she felt when hugging the boys. Huh. How about that? Chapter 16. Landfall. All right everyone, yelled Nami, to the boys scattered around the ship, come to the galley. It's time to make a plan for when we get to the island. The girl turned and walked into the room, taking a seat on the couch and waiting for the others to file in. They couldn't be far from their destination now, a couple of days at most. The winds were in their favor and they hadn't run into any bad weather since the storm. The storm. Nami still remembered the feelings she felt that night. All of them. She was interrupted from her train of thought by the sound of footsteps. The Oranget looked up and saw the three boys walking into the galley, a soft smile coming to her lips. Yes, she still remembered. Sanji, can you make us something to eat, please? Begged Luffy, sitting down on the couch next to the orange-haired girl and putting his feet up on the table. He leaned his head on the back of the couch. Maybe a nap before his snack? Sanji made his way to the stove without question. You got it, Luffy. The straw-hatted boy grinned in his direction. Thanks, Sanji. Luffy opened his eyes and watched as the chef grabbed some beef from the fridge, licking his lips. Sanji's food was the best. He really wanted the blonde to be a pirate with him. Not only was his food the most delicious he'd ever tasted, he just plain liked him. He was his friend and that was as good as any reason. Zoro walked over to the wine rack and grabbed a bottle of sake from one of the diamond-shaped shelves, popping the cork without a word. He removed his katanas from his haramaki and set them next to the rack before sliding down to sit with his back against the refrigerator. The swordsman sat quietly and nursed his drink while he waited for Nami to begin. Seeing that the three were ready to listen, the orange-haired girl did just that. All right. Firstly, the island isn't very large, so we'll need to look for a safe place to anchor the ship. How do you even know where it is in the first place? Sanji asked curiously, watching the beef in his pan pop and sizzle while it fried. Nami had been sailing them directly there, so she must have known where it was. Had she been there before? It wasn't from lack of effort, I'll say that. The Oranget replied, scoffing, I'd been looking for months for anything that would help me find it. I'd heard whispers around the grapevine that Mad Treasure was keeping a hoard of the stuff somewhere in the East Blue. She paused as if remembering something before speaking again, but that's all it ever was, whispers and rumors. Then I met Karina. The chef perked up at the name. It sounded like a woman. He cleared his dry throat, and who might this Karina be? A friend? A love? Sanji winced as he felt the orange-haired girl's shoe connect with the back of his head. Mind out of the gutter, Sanji. Nami berated. The blonde dropped his head down to the meat he was cooking with a pout. Yes ma'am. Satisfied, the girl picked up where she'd left off. She not even a friend. Really just a business acquaintance more than anything. She made her hands into air quotes as she said the word, business. We've known each other for a little while now, but, honestly, I don't even know how she knew about it or why she told me. The two of them never really talked except for a few surface-level interactions over the past year or so. However, the last time she'd seen her had been different. The girl came with an offer to team up. Nami had refused at the time because it was so sudden and out of character for them, but the girl wouldn't be swayed. She'd offered up free info on Mad Treasure's island just to hear her out, and the orange-haired girl had taken her up on it. Suffice to say, Karina had been shocked when she still refused, but she had. She left her there, new info in hand, and immediately began sailing to see if the purple-haired girl's words had been true. They had been. To this day she couldn't think of a good reason for Karina wanting to team up with her so badly. Well, she could think of a few reasons, but she shook her head. Nami had refused her at the time because she knew she couldn't trust the other girl. It probably wouldn't have ended well if she'd accepted. Anyways, enough about that. She smiled deviously. We've got a plan to make. A snore came from her left and she turned, a tick mark slowly forming above her brow at what she saw. A second snore coming from by the fridge stole the Oranget's attention, and another tick mark formed right next to the first. Wake up, you damn idiots. This is important. Is that it? Luffy yelled from the crow's nest, squinting his eyes to look in the distance. It was hard to tell, but it looked like there was an island out there. Had they finally made it? Nami, Sanji, and Zoro all rushed toward the prow of the Going Merry, looking out to see what the straw-hatted boy was talking about. Sure enough, as they all looked out over the lamp figurehead of the ship, in the distance, barely visible, was a small island. Nami's heart sped up. She didn't know how much treasure was on the island, but if the reputation Mad Treasure had built up wasn't just a rumor, it was possible that she could leave with enough money to buy her village's freedom. The Orangeette took a deep breath. That's it. It was hard to rein in the hope she felt in her heart, but she needed to. The island could be empty for all she knew. No need to get excited yet. Zoro grinned as he rested his palms on the blades tucked into his belly warmer. He wanted to fight, and it looked like the time was nearing. Nami Swan, Sanji exclaimed. I can't wait to steal some treasure for you, if I steal enough. Maybe you would bless me with a key. He groaned as the girl's fist collided with his head. In your dreams. Nami deadpanned. All three heads looked up as they heard laughter and joyous screaming. Nami groaned as she watched Luffy's form sail through the air and straight into the water. Luffy, get your ass back here. We've got a plan to follow. The girl screamed after the boy, now swimming in the direction of their destination. Very fast, she might add. Like, very fast. Wait up, Luffy, Zoro yelled, making sure his katanas were secure in his belly warmer. The Verde backed up a couple of steps before sprinting his way up the figurehead and diving into the water to follow his future captain. Zoro! What the hell? Screeched the orange-haired girl, watching another one of her idiots jump into the water. She groaned into the air. Why did they always have to be this way? Nami sighed, turning to walk down to the main deck, and still couldn't help but smile at her friends. She didn't think she'd want them any other way. What a strange thought. Sanji slid down the railing smoothly and stopped Nami in her tracks. So, now it's just you and I, my na. Not the time, Sanji, she said, ignoring the boy as he drooped his head in disappointment. She needed time to calm her nerves and figure out a course of action. Once they got closer to the island, she could figure out a place to drop anchor. Hopefully, Sanji didn't try to jump ship like the other two. She needed him. The girl turned and smiled at the pouting blonde-haired chef. She didn't think she'd have to worry about him going anywhere. Hey Sanji, she said. The chef perked up and looked over to see Nami smiling at him. If you manage to steal more treasure for me than I can steal for myself, maybe we can talk about that kiss. The Orangeette winked and turned away from him. She didn't need to see his reaction. She had an idea of what it might look like. Poor boy. No one was going to be stealing more treasure than her. Sanji's heart lit ablaze and blood filled his nostrils as he thought about the orange-haired girl's words. A lecherous smile spread across his face, imagining what it would be like. A kiss from his Nami Swan. He tried his best, but he simply couldn't take it anymore. His imagination was too much. The blood building up in his nose burst forth and set into the door of the storage room with a thud. The blonde chef had just one more thought before he passed out from his own perverted imagination. He was going to steal every last piece of treasure on that damn island. Anyone who tried to get in his way would die. Luffy lay on the beach breathing heavily. What a swim. It had been way further than he thought. Well, he hadn't really thought about it. He kind of just jumped. The straw-hatted boy lifted his head and looked to where he came from, his eyes shifting across the horizon. He couldn't even see Mary anymore. He dropped his head back to the sand and promptly passed out as the waves lapped at his feet, a sleep bubble forming in his nose. Zoro gasped for breath as he continued to pump his arms through the water, looking ahead and groaning through his swimming strokes. He couldn't see Luffy anymore. When had he even lost the straw-hatted idiot? Damn the kid and his love for the water. The swordsman's muscles were beginning to cramp and it was getting harder to move in the same way over and over again. How long had he been swimming? It felt like hours. Was he going to drown out here? What a terrible way for a swordsman to go out. The thought spurred him into swimming harder. He couldn't die like that. Too embarrassing. The Verde swam as hard as he could for. He honestly couldn't even say. It felt like forever. So, when he finally began to feel the water shallow out, he groaned in relief. Zoro set his feet on the sand and waded his way out of the water to the beach, collapsing soon after he made it. Damn, he was tired. He let his neck muscles relax and his head fell down to the left. His vision was blurry from the salt water, but was that a person? Luffy? He questioned. The teen saw something pop above the figure's face and he could have sworn he heard the laughter of his future captain. "What a nap!" exclaimed the straw-hatted boy, stretching his arms out over his head and turning in the direction of the voice that had awoken him. "Zoro? You made it," he said excitedly. He stood up and brushed the sand from his shorts as he made his way over to the swordsman, looking at his still form in curiosity. He poked his friend with his sandal. "Zoro?" He poked him once more. "Zoro?" The Verde's form remained unmoving, must be asleep. Luffy said to himself. Oh well. He turned away from his friend, leaving him to rest, and faced the island. Nami was right when she said it was small. It couldn't be but 2 miles from coast to coast. A lot of the sand was mixed with dirt and rock, likely from the mountain that took up most of the land. It actually looked more like a mini volcano than a mountain. The teen turned to look at his sleeping friend before turning back with a grin. "More fun for me." He quickly made his way from the beach into the forest that covered the base of the mountain. Looking at the base of the mountain peeking over the trees, he couldn't help but think that it would be a great place to look for the treasure. He paused for a moment in thought before shrugging to himself and continuing. For some reason, he felt like he remembered Nami mentioning something about the mountain. Luffy's footsteps slowed as he approached a particular area of the tall landform. One where the slope increased exponentially as he continued to look upward. His eyes continued to move upward and he couldn't help but marvel at how steep it was. Shaking his head, he focused back on the rock in front of him. No time to be amazed by mountains. He had treasure to steal. Then maybe she would come to chase her dreams with him. Nami had mentioned something and now that he was thinking about it, he definitely remembered her saying something about the mountain. At least he thought he remembered. Yeah, he hadn't really been listening. What? It was Sanji's fault for giving him the meat. She might have also mentioned the way to get in. Maybe the treasure was inside it? Alright. Fine, he should have been listening. Luffy shook his head again and pulled his arm back, hoping he could solve the problem like he always did, curling the fingers of his right hand. He looked at the rock face, shrugging, before slamming his fist into the stone with a loud crack. His arm buried itself in the stone and cracks rocketed out from the impact point as he slowly removed his hand. The cracked rock began to crumble away, revealing more rock. The teen groaned. It looked like he wouldn't be doing things the way he usually did. He backed away and huffed dejectedly, looking up at the sky. He didn't want to wait for Nami. She was gonna take forever. His eyes were caught by the top of the mountain once again and a great idea sprung into his head. Instead of just waiting for them, why not climb the mountain and look for them from up there? It sounded like fun and that was more than enough to get Luffy's feet moving once again. Maybe he would even go all the way to the top. Sanji, starboard until I say. Nami yelled from the main deck, a formation of rocks directly in her line of sight. The boat began to slowly turn right on her command. It was perfect, just large enough to cover up the entirety of the ship. The only unfortunate part about their hiding spot was the distance still between them and the island. It wouldn't be so bad if they had a raft. But they didn't. The Orangeette cursed herself for leaving their old boat on Gecko Island. It would have been really handy. She quickly shook her head to rid herself of the thought. Even if they had towed it, it probably would have gotten lost in the storm anyway. Alright, straighten this out and get ready to drop anchor. Nami hopped the rail and dropped to the deck below. The girl walked to the side railing of the Mary and looked over it, making sure they were a safe enough distance from the rocks so as not to damage the vessel but still close enough to hide her. Sanji, get to the storeroom and drop the anchor, the girl ordered, and grab me some rope and a life preserver while you're in there. Sanji came rushing out of the galley. Your wish is my command, my queen. The blonde twirled his way down the steps and turned to make his way through the door to the storeroom. The anchor splashed into the water below not a moment later and he came out of the door with the items she'd requested in a flash. Nami Swan. I did everything you asked, the blonde-haired boy exclaimed, handing her the items she'd requested. She thanked him and set the items on the ground next to her bag, beginning to remove her clothes. Nami Swan. Sanji babbled, bleeding heavily from the nose. What a gift this was. We can't. He was almost at a loss for words. I mean we could. But I know the other two are gone. Bu. A fist slammed into his face so fast his body folded, the back of his head slamming into the wooden deck of the Mary. Nami whined as she pulled her hand back, blowing on her finger. Damn it, Sanji. You broke my nail. The girl looked at the boy on the floor and scoffed at his expression. Even barely conscious, he was still ever the pervert. She finished the pity party for her broken nail and began to gather up the clothes she'd taken off. She didn't even know what Sanji was really getting worked up about. He'd seen her in a bikini before. Alright, you little perv. Wakey, wakey. She cooed, stuffing her shorts and shirt into her bag. Lucidity came back to Sanji's eyes and he slowly sat up, wincing. Damn, the girl could punch. He grabbed his nose and snapped it back into place with a groan. Alright Sanji, it's time for a swim, she said as she used the rope to tie her bag securely to the life preserver. It wouldn't keep her clothes completely dry, but it was better than trying to sneak around sopping wet. The girl grabbed the opposite end of the rope and tied it around her ankle. Sanji reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a smoke. Mind throwing my cigarettes in that bee? Absolutely not. I don't want my stuff smelling like smoke. Makes it harder to sneak around. The girl ignorant appeared over his head and gently tossed her life preserver over the rail opposite the rocks. Don't forget, Sanji. You steal more treasure than me and I'll give you a kiss. Nami turned and winked at the chef. Wind blew her hair back as a body flew by and into the water below. She turned and watched Sanji furiously swimming toward the island with a smile on her face. The laughter came when she began to hear his loud roars of what he would probably call passion. The orangeette stepped up onto the wooden rail as her laughter echoed into the air, and one last thought crossed her mind before she dove off. Time to steal some treasure. Zoro groaned, his eyes groggily fluttering open as he slowly lifted his top half to sit up and look around, sighing. Nope. The swordsman didn't see him anywhere. Great. Just great. He stood to his feet and turned around to get a look at the island behind him, recognizing the volcano-like mountain to be the place Nami said the treasure would be. If Luffy had gone anywhere, more than likely it was in that direction. He turned back around to face the sea, casting his gaze to the distant waters and shifting his eyes across the horizon. However, they were met with nothing but the bright blue liquid of the ocean. The Verde groaned. No Mary meant no Nami and no cook. And with Luffy nowhere to be found, either, it looked like he was all by his lonesome. Well, nothing to do about it now. He shrugged to himself and turned back to the land, beginning to walk toward the tree line. As his feet carried him into the forest, he grinned to himself. A fight was nearing. Somehow he could just feel it. He was excited. He wanted to grow in his swordsmanship, and to do that he needed to fight strong people. Swordsmen or women would be preferable, but Luffy had proved that he needed experience facing all types of opponents. The Forest Lord cemented the fact. Zoro felt Wado and Kitetsu lightly vibrating in their sheaths, singing their praises for his way of thinking. His smile turned more genuine when he looked down at Wado resting in its white sheath. It was strange to think that there was a time when he couldn't hear his swords. He glanced at his second blade, his smile softening even further as dark ebony skin and gray-white hair flashed through his mind. The swordsman was thankful he'd met him. He owed much of his recent growth to the man. The swordsman lightly shook the thoughts away and his bloodthirsty grin slowly returned. The time for reminiscing had passed. Come on feet. Do your thing and get me to where I need to go, he said excitedly, turning away from the sea and making his way into the forest. Sanji stepped out of the water and reached into his breast pocket. His hand was met with the soggy box of cigarettes resting there and he groaned, pulling them out. The chef took out 3 from the box and tossed the rest, grabbing his lighter from the pocket of his black pants. Sanji, what the hell are you doing? Nami asked through slightly heavy breath, stepping out of the water beside him. The swim hadn't been too bad. She'd always been a good swimmer. The little workout had actually been pretty enjoyable. Maybe she would take Luffy up on his offers of swimming more often. A pit formed in her stomach. Oh yeah. She shook her head. She had treasure to steal. However, even as she wiped the thoughts away, she couldn't quite get rid of the feeling making her want to squirm. The chef turned and his eyes landed on the girl's bikini-clad form, immediately turning to hearts. Sanji. The orangeette growled, now wasn't the time. The hearts immediately left his eyes and he turned back to his cigarettes. Message received. I'm drying these out. The rest are toast. He replied in answer to her question. He let the flame of his lighter dry the white sticks out and when he was satisfied, stuck one in his mouth, lighting it, and put the other two behind his ears. Nami scoffed at the boy as she reeled her bag in from the ocean. Time to see if Operation Keep Clothes Dry was a success. The orange-haired girl grabbed the life preserver and untied her bag, opening it to view its contents. She pulled out her clothes and was surprised to see that both items were completely dry, quickly beginning to dress. Once she picked up her bag and pulled a piece of paper out of one of the pockets, examining it carefully. She'd tried to draw a map from the description Karina had given her the last time she saw her, but it was rudimentary at best. The orange's eyes glanced over the paper for another moment until she was satisfied that she had a rough idea of where they were going, folding it and storing it between her breasts. What? It was a handy place to keep things. Nami closed all the pockets on her bag, throwing it around her shoulders. All right, Sanji. I've got a relative idea of where we need to go. Let's get moving. Sanji turned toward the forest with a lecherous smile on his face. He didn't know she could hide things in there. He berated himself, shaking his head. He shouldn't be thinking about such things right now, he had a job to do. He turned, beginning to follow behind the orange-haired girl as she made her way toward the forest. As eyes glanced up at the landform in the background, the chef tried to stop the small lewd smile that came to his lips but couldn't. That mountain held the key to his destiny. Zoro was brought out of his thoughts as he stepped past a line of trees. He'd been walking for some time now and had yet to make it to the mountain. Must have been further away than he thought. The swordsman looked around the area and found himself standing on the edge of a small cliff. Weird. The ocean was supposed to be behind him and the mountain directly in front. He sighed, dropping his eyes downward, and found himself looking at a smooth rock face reaching all the way to the water below. Zoro turned his head left and smirked when he saw the backside of the mountain. He knew he'd been going in the right direction. However, it was strange. The backside of the mountain was a sheer rock cliff face, similar to what he was standing over. Actually, as his head turned right to examine the other side, he couldn't help but think the entire backside of the island looked flat. As if some higher being sliced the opposite side away and it had sunk into the ocean. It was a strange sight, to say the least. Just when the Verde turned away from the cliff and toward the mountain, he began to feel a slight vibration under his feet and looked down the cliff face again. His eyes searched for the source of the tremors and he almost missed it. A part of him wasn't even certain he was seeing anything. If his vision wasn't deceiving him, there was a ship in the distance and it looked like it was sailing directly at the island. He watched the vessel approach, barely a speck in his vision, and gaped when it disappeared. Had it actually just sailed straight into the rock? That was suicide. A thought popped into his head and he looked to the mountain, trying to gauge the distance from the peak. It looked about right. Zoro didn't know for sure, but he thought the distances matched. If he was right, the peak of the mountain would be right in line with where the ship had disappeared. He sighed to himself. There was only really one way to find out if he was right or not. Well, the only way he could think of right now. He made sure Wado and Kitetsu were tightly secured before stepping a good ways back and taking a calming breath. With his mindset, the Verde wasted no more time, sprinting forward and throwing himself off the cliff with a holler. Time for another swim. Man, what a view, Luffy yelled, cresting upon the peak of the mountain. It was colder up there, frost covering the rock around him. The top of the tall landform was more volcano-like than the boy first thought. Maybe it actually was a volcano. In the middle of the peak was a large empty crater. Well, mostly empty. Directly in the center was a small gathering of rocks. Weird. The straw-hatted boy curiosity and to the ring of the peak he was standing on. He wanted to see the ocean from up there. Luffy made his way around the crater at a leisurely pace until he sat at the opposite side he had climbed up from. He looked out over the side of the mountain and was surprised, not by the water, but by the empty space he was looking at. He took a step back, his eyes widening. That wasn't quite what he expected. He shook his head and looked out to sea as he sat down for a quick respite before going to explore the crater. He was so glad he decided to go out to sea a little early. He'd met so many cool people. The adventures he'd had already came to his mind and he smiled his smile to the sky, closing his eyes and leaning back to lay on the rock below. He couldn't wait to be a pirate. If just sailing around the East Blue was this fun. His body got jittery with excitement from just thinking about it. The boy shot to his feet and said goodbye to the pretty view, turning toward the rocks in the middle of the area behind him. Something about them was weird and he wanted to see what it was. Luffy slid down the side of the crater, dirt and rock following him along the way, and came to a stop when his feet found the base. He looked around the large area and still couldn't see anything other than the weird rocks, slowly walking up to the area to examine them. As Luffy made his way over, the rock under his feet began to rumble slightly. He looked down and saw the dirt vibrating. What was going on? He glanced around the crater to see if anything was changing, but everything remained the same. The boy stood still, wondering where the vibrations were coming from, until the rumbling eventually stopped. He didn't move for a moment, watching to see if anything else would happen, and when nothing did he shrugged, continuing on his way to the center of the crater. That was weird, but the rock was weirder and he wanted to see what it was. Now that he was closer, he could see that it was one large piece of stone that looked like multiple rocks glued together. The whole piece was a dark gray and relatively uniform in color across the surface. The straw-hatted boy paused for a moment before slowly and cautiously placing the palm of his right hand on the stone. For some reason. Nope. Just regular stone. Weird. Why did he feel like that should have done something? The boy took his hand back and began to circle the rock. It was a different color than all of the other rock around it, so it had probably been put there by someone. The question was, why? Luffy groaned as he felt steam rising off his head. Too much thinking. He eyed the gray curiosity and shrugged, cocking his fist back the same as he had previously in the day. The straw-hatted teen shot his fist forward with a boom. However, instead of the expected crack of stone sounding into the air, it was instead the crack of Luffy's bones. He hissed in pain, recoiling as he blew on his already red and quickly swelling hand. What the hell is that stuff? He complained in pain. He knew there was something weird about those rocks. Luffy continued to blow on his pulsing hand, circling the rocks once again. So, he couldn't punch them. He took a moment to glance at his hand. Definitely couldn't punch them. Well, then what the hell was he supposed to do? The pain was starting to make him grumpy and he began kicking at some of the small pebbles on the ground to make himself feel better. It was working until he went to kick one of the larger ones. When his foot made contact with the small rock, it didn't budge. But he sure did. Luffy fell straight forward and shoved his hands out in front of his body to soften the fall, seemingly forgetting that he'd just probably broken one of them. The black-haired teen yelped as his injured hand caught some of his weight, rolling off it as quickly as he could as not to injure it any further. He still wanted to fight this treasure guy. His hand was bound to get hurt worse during the battle, so he needed to make sure he didn't do anything else to damage it right now. Luffy groaned while he stood to his feet and tried to fold his fingers into a fist, wincing at the attempt. It was still possible, but it certainly didn't feel good. The future pirate captain looked down to where he'd fallen and his eyes landed on the large pebble he'd tried to kick, crouching down to examine it. He began to fiddle with it, his uninjured hand pushing the top of it into the ground. Nothing. He grabbed it and pulled up, trying to pull it out of the ground. Nothing. He pushed it forward, away from himself. Nothing. Toward himself. Nothing. Left. Nothing. Right. Something. The pebble shifted right by about a foot and stopped once again. Luffy looked at the gray stone, expectantly, but nothing happened. He frowned, looking down at the pebble once again. It had moved but nothing happened. Why? His head was starting to smoke again, but his curiosity was piqued now. Maybe if he figured this out it would lead him to Treasure Guy. Then he could beat him up and Nami could take the treasure. Then she would be a pirate with him. The teen grabbed the stone once again, now even more determined to figure the puzzle out. He went through all the directions again and this time the stone pushed forward. He was starting to get it. The routine continued for a few minutes before he finally had the pebble pushed to a position right next to the rock. A click echoed from somewhere underneath the teen's feet, but the large stone still remained unmoving. Luffy huffed in irritation, glaring at the pebble. He'd thought for sure that would do it. He jumped in surprise when a loud whirring sound came from below him, watching in curiosity as the pebble began to rise from the ground. It sat on top of a metal rod slowly coming out of the stone. The rod stopped rising when the small rock was pushed about a foot in the air and the area quieted once again. The teen glanced hopefully back at the gray rock, pouting when it still didn't move. Luffy walked up to the metal sticking out of the ground and examined it. What the hell was he even supposed to do with this thing? He grasped the mechanism, expecting it to be unmovable, and was surprised when the rod shifted forward from his light touch. He tested it the other way and sure enough, it moved just as easily in that direction. Testing the rest of the directions, he came to the conclusion that the rod ran on a cross. What he was supposed to do with that information? He hadn't a clue. The straw-hatted boy groaned in frustration as nothing continued to happen, no matter what he did. It seemed like the joystick-type thing did nothing. He growled and grasped the pole, furiously yanking it in all different directions as fast as he could. He looked like a child throwing a tantrum after losing at a game one too many times. Suddenly, the metal rod locked up and the sound of gears shifting drifted up from underneath the rock. The teen yelped when the metal pole was wrenched from his hand, sinking back into the ground in an instant and leaving only the pebble visible once again. He scooted backward as the rocks he had been trying his hardest to move, finally began to shift. The sound of grinding gears slowly came to a stop and the gray rock stopped moving as well. Now, directly below where the rocks previously sat, was a metal trapdoor. Luffy sighed in relief. Finally. The boy made his way over to the trapdoor, grasping the handle indented into the metal, and pulled it open, warm air blowing past his face. He looked down to see a ladder hanging on one of the walls, leading down into pitch-black darkness, and his body started vibrating in excitement. It was finally time for the meat and potatoes of this adventure. Luffy quickly made his way over to the ladder and began to climb down, looking up at the light as he descended. At least if this didn't end up being the right place, he could just come back up and look for another way. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he began to hear gears again. The future pirate captain watched the back into place above him. Blankly, the loud bang traveling down to his descending form. Complete darkness consumed his vision when he looked above, so he decided to look below. To the exact same thing. Luffy sighed to himself as he continued to make his way down the ladder. He really hoped he was going the right way.